3 of Grave Breaches. I'm Megan.
And I'm Daniel.
And today we're discussing the No Gun Ri Massacre.
Correct, which happened a few years ago in 1950.
Yeah, a little bit more of a recent case this week compared to last week.
Oh, before we get into it, after recording episode 1, we realized we made a mistake.
Yeah.
And then we discussed correcting it on episode 2. Record the whole thing, never said it. But here we are, episode 3.
We mentioned the Bales case, he was a officer?
I said no.
Okay.
Staff sergeant.
Sergeant.
But we're not getting into that. That's
Yeah,
another
no,
episode. But I guessed Chris.
And I think I said, what did I say? Michael?
But it's actually Joseph, right? Joseph Bales?
Robert Bales.
Maybe one of us. Either way, we're fixing it now. Robert Bales.
Yes, we messed up.
Was that staff sergeant, though? Yeah, we're definitely going to discuss in a later episode.
Yeah.
But, yeah, back to today's episode, No Gun Ri, happened in Korea, something we don't hear a lot about. This was 50, bad at math, about 72 years ago.
Yeah.
If we just look at years, but it happened in July. The strange thing about this is most of these war crimes have a specific date. This actually has a window, July 26th through July 29th of 1950. And as most of these will end up having, especially older ones, a bit of a history lesson. So in August 1945, Korea was divided as it was reinstated as Korea because after Japanese occupied in 1905 and then formally 5 years later, the occupation, this happened with the conclusion of the Russo-Japanese War. Which only lasted it was actually, how many days? I think 3 days shy of 6 months, it didn't even last 6 months.
Okay.
Almost, but didn't last 6 months, that Russo-Japanese War, which we don't hear a lot about, and a lot of people actually contribute that as the beginning of World War II. So if you're looking to do some extended reading, look into that. Again, probably have a million episodes we'll do out of that as far as war crimes go. But after Korea's split at the end of World War II, that's how we end up, I guess, settling there. Tensions remained high from this point until 1950, when Communist Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which we know as North Korea, made a full-on attack of the non-communist Republic of Korea in the south, obviously what we would call South Korea, crossing the 38th parallel on June 25th. So America acted pretty quick on this one. 2 days later, we make a formal declaration of war on June 27th. The issue here is we are looking at the American military that just won World War II, and they are on a high from this, and for obvious reasons, like they whoop some tail, and they're the heroes of the world.
And they were the heroes, yeah.
They're on top of the world, and nobody can stop them. And so they go into this with that mindset: we're the American military, nobody can stop us.
And we're going to stop communism from spreading.
And to make matters worse, if you know anything about General MacArthur, who is a very prominent person of World War II, he is actually in charge of the U.S. forces in Korea for the Korean War.
And see, I didn't know that. There's so much I don't know about
so
this.
He's already a cocky son of a gun, but we're looking at the mastermind, or at least in his eyes, whether you want to debate it or not, at least in his eyes, he's a mastermind behind winning the Pacific.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to argue. He did great things. But, yeah, he's very cocky, and in turn, battle plans, strategies, everything goes into this with a rolling over the enemy, no problems at all mindset, and it ends up biting them in the butt. So there's the history and what we're getting into. As for the No Gun Ri, this is documented as the second largest war crime in U.S. Army history, what we're about to get into today. It's on the heels of, and this actually plays a major factor in what happens in this actual incident. The Battle of Taeheon ends up being abandoned on July 20th. So within the week of our incident, American forces overrun. Now, they have been really surprised by who they're fighting up to this point. But the thing that makes this so important is that this is the first time an American defensive position has been overrun. So they completely, they abandon it and get out of Dodge. The enemy, they find out the hard way, is larger, better equipped, and much better fighters than anyone had projected from the top down. Nobody expected what they were fighting.
So the Americans came in ready for this to be easy, and they quickly discover this is not going to be a piece of cake.
Correct.
Okay. So they've been knocked down a notch or two.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And before we get into this, I got to give a shout out to Professor mine, Dr. Skiles, because he had assigned this book, and the reason I'm going to bring this book up, I'll tell you in a second, but if I'm going to use it, I'm going to mention it. It's called Histories and Fallacies, Problems Faced in the Writing of History, and it is by Carl R. Truman. But the reason I brought this book up is we kind of got into it a little bit last episode, but we're certainly going to on this episode. And we're talking about, what's the word? Daniel knows this word. Daniel's about to say this word any second.
Okay.
Eyewitness testimonies,
Yeah.
just statements. And in this book, Histories and Fallacies, it revolves around Holocaust denial. You know, these people who, and what's kind of scary is a lot of these people are actually like educated people.
That is scary.
And whether they genuinely believe it or not, they are promoting this belief that the Holocaust didn't happen, or at least didn't happen
That's crazy.
in the way which we all know
We
it
were
did.
told it did, yeah.
So
That's nuts.
but and I think it revolves around that not because it obviously does not agree with that, but it's saying like, hey, for historians, I mean, this goes to show that there can be more than one truth, no matter how obvious the truth is. There can be two different viewpoints on something, and it's not just ignorance all the time. But it talks about this Holocaust, the Holocaust denial camp ran with. There was a Holocaust survivor, concentration camp survivor, brought onto a talk show. This was all years ago.
Yeah.
And she was speaking, and they were debating her and a Holocaust denier. And she, I don't know if it was pulled out of her how it came to this, but she mentioned those killed in the concentration camps being made into soap as a common practice. Now there's been talk about that. There's been but never, in the way she presented it, it was a ongoing thing done on a mass scale, and there's absolutely zero evidence of that ever taking place.
Really?
And so the whole Holocaust denier camp ran with this and said, look, you can't trust people because this is what they say. And all I'm getting at is like, we can't deny things happened because one individual misremembers something.
Or presented something that can't be proven.
Correct. And sometimes, the mind is such a crazy thing. I'm sure we're going to talk about that in every episode, but, you hear something enough, you might believe it's true, or you might be trying to, even though you did survive something crazy, you're trying to really drive home how crazy that was indeed, and you just get carried away with it. But either way, this woman saying people were made into soap, where that happened on a large scale, maybe a
Maybe
single...
it just happened at the concentration camp she was at.
But either way, let's, for the sake of this argument, say she later came out and said, you're right, I lied about that. That doesn't do away with the fact that the Holocaust took place. That doesn't do away with the fact that concentration camps existed.
Yeah, and did do horrible things.
Yeah, so anyway, that's a very long precursor to what we're getting into today, but we'll see where that'll tie into this.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm pulling from a bunch of different archives on this, and I did read somewhere, but I could not verify it, and the way it was worded was too vague for me to really say without certainty, but I did find it very interesting but I came across something that said this unit, I don't think it was a whole unit because I later found out it had been out there longer, but I think maybe a wave of reinforcements had gotten there.
Yeah.
A reservist or something, but it said they had only been in country 3 days. So I guess very new. And, you know, obviously if you're coming into a situation and all the veterans around you have been, in essence, getting it handed to them, like that puts you in a different headspace.
Yeah.
But again, certainly not the whole unit. They had been there, but maybe there was just enough of a relief effort who had just gotten there for that statement to have been made. But anyways, when they get there, they are told, and as we're going to see reading through statements from actual military correspondence and communications, it was put out there that the North Koreans would likely try to infiltrate American lines disguised as refugees. And something I know, there was a limited impact by guerrilla warfare. You do see, it's not on the scale you see in Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan, but there is guerrilla tactics being used to disrupt supply lines, communications, just the things that guerrilla warfare does.
Yeah.
So there is I wouldn't call Korea a asymmetrical war, but there are certainly
some irregularities.
Correct.
Okay.
And before you get into it, I'm sorry, and before the beautiful voice of Megan takes over from here, I'm going to go ahead and get ahead of this and correct something. Actually, we're not even correcting it. We're just letting y'all know. Apparently, back in the day, perhaps, it was called Battalion. We're talking about 27 Cav. That's who's involved with this incident, 27 Cav. And all this documentation is going to refer to them as 2nd Battalion, 7th Regiment. So for all my Cav guys out there, we know it's 2nd Squadron.
Yeah, you know all these terms. You're looking at me like I'm going to help you. I don't know all these by heart.
You're going to hear battalion in there. That's not a typo on our end. That's how it was documented from back in the day. But 27 Cav.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to take over with the facts of the incident. The U.S. 8th Army, which was in charge of Korea, had radioed orders throughout the Korean front that began, no refugees will be permitted to cross battle lines at any time. According to declassified documents located at the National Archives in Washington, 2 days earlier, 1st Cavalry Division headquarters issued a more explicit order, no refugees to cross the front line. Fire everyone trying to cross lines. Wow. Use discretion in case, well, at least they included this, use discretion in case of women and children. How nice of them. In the neighboring 25th Infantry Division, the commander, Major General William B. Keane, told his troops that since South Koreans were to have been evacuated from the battle zone, all civilians, this is in quotation marks, all civilians in this area are to be considered as enemy and action taken accordingly, end quote. His staff relayed this as considered as unfriendly and shot. Yeah,
so that is something we didn't discuss yet. It's not in these notes, but they did go through with, would they be megaphones? Not megaphones for cheerleaders, right?
Yeah, but like that same concept of like
speakers.
Yeah.
There we go. Massive speakers. They made announcements in Korean, not just in English, but so they had interpreters. They could understand what was being said, but they were telling everybody, hey, get out of here. There's going to be some fighting going on here.
Yeah. Kind of like they did before they bombed Iwo Jima. They did warn them. They dropped with those flyers.
Oh, yeah.
So they didn't go unwarned, but I mean.
But I think the biggest thing to take away from this is they were telling these people, hey, move, so whenever this incident kicks off, they were in essence told to go where they ended up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there wasn't
Which is problematic.
Little bit. There wasn't a whole lot to find as far as war crimes on America's side of things. There was a good bit for the North Korean side of things. So when I found this, there was only 2, and one of them I guess by definition, I understand where they're going with it, but it was really just them talking about the bombing of North Korea and how American forces, and we're not talking just the pilots, but just their strategy was to bomb everything. There was a quote from a guy saying if there was 2 bricks stacked on top of each other, it was getting bombed.
Yeah, there was no discretion in bombing.
Even if they weren't directed to with these speakers, there's a chance that some of these people weren't even evacuating from the towns they were directed to, but had their entire village, home, house, livelihood destroyed by bombs prior to this incident. Yeah. So it's a whole lot just getting thrown in this pot of fiasco, really. But yeah, they were certainly told it wasn't just a surprise that this is happening. That's why it's kind of so strange to hear those commands coming down from the top.
Yeah.
Don't allow refugees across your lines.
Because they were literally being told to do so,
correct.
Right? To get out of that area.
Yeah.
So, I mean, interesting. Okay. The No Gun Ri incident happened right at this moment. It started on July 26, 1950, and continued until the morning of July 29th. According to survivors, on July 23rd, the U.S. Army ordered the villagers of No Gun Ri to vacate the village because there might be combat. They evacuated and moved to Ri, located 1.5 miles south. 2 days later, on July 25th, the U.S. Army again ordered the villagers to move south toward Taegu or Busan. Is I'm reading that? About 500 people from the 2 villages walked toward No Gun Ri, being accompanied by U.S. troops. They stayed one night at Ri and arrived at No Gun Ri on the morning of July 26th. According to secret U.S. military intelligence reports written during this period, when the refugees entered the underpasses on July 26th, the North Korean front line was 4 miles from No Gun Ri.
So, yeah, that's something that definitely can't be overlooked, is for a period of time, it says escorted or accompanied by U.S. troops. So we have to beg the question, if we are supposed to believe they didn't know if there were enemy among these people when this incident takes place, like to the point they're going to kill them, why were they being accompanied by these same, you know what I'm saying? I feel like if that's our genuine argument, like that's the same we're going to take, then something should have been done while they were being escorted.
That's true.
Now, at the same time, I do get the fact that we're now talking about the North Koreans being 4 miles from this place.
Yeah.
And you know they just overran an entire defensive position. Like, you're a little on edge. And I can understand that aspect. But I don't know how we come to where we end up in this incident.
With them being accompanied by troops, U.S. troops, that doesn't make sense to me that this still occurred. It's not making any sense, but and then especially reading this next part where it says, as the refugees neared No Gun Ri leading ox carts, some with children on their backs, American soldiers ordered them off the southbound dirt road and onto a parallel railroad track. I'm just getting that mental image with those kids, those children, and like the U.S. troops were there and saw. I don't know. I'm still having a hard time.
Well, up to this point, I don't know if they've made this decision in their heads to kill these people. I think the next line you start with, I think that's where I see this turning
decision is made.
Yeah, from getting them off the road so they can use it to what it ends up becoming.
Because, I'm just picturing them walking alongside these people with their children, these families, and thinking, like, knowing what they're going to do. So you don't think that's what's happening here?
Well, it kind of goes off to, you can play off, and it happens in all kinds of scenarios, good or bad. You can play off of other people.
Yeah.
So right now, we're just getting them off the road. And then all of a sudden, actually, you know what? Read the next line, then we can talk about it.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. I did the same thing. I stopped and I'm getting ahead of ourselves. All right. The killing reportedly began when American planes suddenly swooped in and strafed an area where the white-clad refugees were resting.
So boom, just like that, I went from not having a reason as a young man on the ground here. I went from not having a reason to having a reason. Those planes must have seen something. Like somebody must have seen something. There's now a threat, and I can justify my actions just like that. And I think I really see that's what played out. For the time being, they were just, these guys, there's so many different things going on in their heads, but now somebody just lit the fuse on, open game. You get to do whatever you want right here. And that happens, and we're about to see how far that goes in this incident for sure.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess I'm still having a hard time reconciling that with my brain because I knew these were families, but I guess it makes a little bit more sense when you say it like that. But it's still hard for me.
I've been there.
Yeah.
I
know you have a unique
I didn't know
perspective.
how much, I didn't bring up anything last episode, but I guess there's enough to play with it now. But once I started talking on me being able to put my mind there was an incident, my first deployment, where I don't want to say there's any rockets or mortars being shot. There's certainly small arms fire, and just kind of the compound we were in, like we all ran to the rooftop because there was like no windows. As a matter of fact, we're running up these stairs, and these crazy ass Iraqi, I don't know if they were police or army, but they're just sticking up their rifles out of these windows. Like, you can't see out of the windows, but the stairway had windows, but they're just so high. Like, he had to reach his arm all the way up and just blindly
Couldn't see what he was doing, yeah.
We ran all the way to the top, and I can't remember what kind of attachments were, like, visiting. They weren't even, I think they were there to collect some prisoners we had gathered up. But, so, a MIT team, HIT team, I don't know, there's so many different acronyms, but there's a team of Marines there to gather these guys when this happens. So we all get on the rooftop, and I remember I just wanted to kill somebody, and there was an old man coming out of, like, his house. Mm-hmm. Honestly, kind of a bad idea on his part, but he was coming out of his house, and I remember thinking, I can't justify me shooting this guy for no reason. He doesn't have a weapon or anything. But if I can get somebody else to shoot at him, boom, just like that, I'm okay doing this. So I remember we're on this rooftop just scanning to see, because I don't think we're being shot at this point, or we're just trying to find a trigger man, Yeah. And that guy comes out. I remember turning this Iraqi, I don't know him from Adam. It's not like we had a relationship. I don't know how much English he speaks, but he sees the old man too, and his rifle's already pointing at him. We both have our rifles pointing at this guy. And I remember turning to him and saying, shoot him. And, like, trying to get across, shoot this guy, because I know he's going to miss. But when he misses,
then you can shoot him.
Exactly. And I remember this team member, he was a sergeant. And I remember him looking at me like something was wrong with me. And I remember just wanting to throw him off the roof for doing this. But I remember just going, no, and, like, jumped over this guy's rifle so that he couldn't shoot this guy. And I remember being like, dude, you piece of crap. But not proud of that moment by any means.
Because that man had no guns.
Yeah, but having been there, like, I can see where these guys are at. Like, these aircraft come in, strafe the area. Oh, boom, okay, these are bad guys? Yeah, I can get on board with that. Yeah. Now we're rocking and rolling. And we kind of see what comes out of that mindset.
Yeah. Well, see, you have a different perspective than I have from being over there and being in kind of this type of situation. All right. So the killing continued. The American soldiers directed the refugees into the bridge underpasses, each 80 feet long, 23 feet wide, 30 feet high, and after dark, opened fire on them from nearby machine gun positions. So it's crazy to me these poor people are still, I guess they didn't have a choice but to follow what they're telling them to do. But I mean, at this point, I would no longer trust them.
Oh, yeah, they kind of get funneled in.
They don't really have a choice.
A really bad situation. And if you actually go and do if you look into this yourself, and we'll get to it at the end, but like there's a picture of recent investigations, and there's still, I mean, the bridge is still there, the valley's still there, and there's pot marks all over, like I guess the walls of the ravine there, with shrapnel and bullet holes, and it's marked from the investigation, like all these little white circles all over the place. But like the remnants of this tragedy are very much still present there today. Yeah.
And this is in South Korea? Or
Yes.
is this in North Korea,
Well,
where this happened?
I don't know. Why did you ask that question?
I don't know. I guess that would be something to...
Because, I mean, American forces did go into North Korea. We're going to have to Google that while we're talking.
Okay.
Actually, why don't you Google that when it's my turn?
As I say.
You finish your turn. Or should I Google it while you're finishing?
Oh, well, why don't you Google it while I'm finishing? Okay. So, ex-GI Herman Patterson said it was just wholesale slaughter. After speaking with superior officers by radio, Captain Melbourne C. Chandler had ordered machine gunners to set up near the tunnel mouths and open fire. So these poor people were just trapped.
You know, I should have known it'd be South Korea. We wouldn't have this kind of... I'm sure North Korea wouldn't...
Have allowed this.
Yeah.
They would have already been on top of this.
Well, as far as like just research and like, yeah, so it was South Korea.
That's what I mean. Like they would have probably... They very much are controlling the narrative on their end of things. Okay. The No Gun Ri survivors assert that no hostile fire originated from the refugees under the bridge. According to the Korean claimants, the soldiers shot and killed those near the tunnel entrances first.
And so what's happening, the stories that come out of this become so much more graphic because it lasted a period of time. And you get the sense that it was kind of like a little, almost a rite of passage that kind of existed in the area. The way shots are taken at these guys, like, hey, there's some free targets down there, go get you one or two. The way this exists. But while these people are down there, obviously they've already been traveling. So you hear stories about, while, especially at the beginning of this, women trying to dig like little foxholes for themselves to hide their children in while they're being shot at with their hands. After the first day, the second day, there's the few that are surviving this having to drink bloodied water because, you know, there's a little stream in there, but it's obviously saturated with the blood of family members. And just being put in an even worse situation than it already is, just having to survive and the tragedy while still trying to survive it itself. It was really a pretty dark situation.
It's pretty horrible. That's something that is always hard for me on these war crimes when we discuss them, is just the lack of seeing these people as human. And do you think, like, do you think that's just from the time period? But then our first case was fairly modern, of like, you know, there's such a separation in cultures that it's easy to dehumanize somebody who's not just like you and coming from where you came from. Or I don't know, or as this goes back to these guys are all mostly young and don't have a fully developed frontal lobe and are just go into this different place in this different mode, or I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a few things. I mean, obviously you have to train young men to be comfortable taking a person's life.
Yeah.
So that's something that certainly goes into it. Whenever you hear about the way the Korean War played out and like entire, you know, units being destroyed, that kind of changes a lot for your viewpoint. Even if you go in with the most upbeat, you know, level-headed mindset, to hear about your brothers in arms being just annihilated, that kind of changes a lot of things for you. And a lot of these guys were veterans of World War II, just because it's so close to that time period.
Yeah, and they're coming off of...
I mean, those guys...
I know.
They went through a lot, and I can't imagine... I can't imagine going through what they went through. But then to come home for a few years... and
go back
be turned on, if you will, again like that. Like,
well, a lot of them probably had PTSD.
Yeah.
was suffering from PTSD. And it was a lot more accepted. I mean, you can see, we recently went to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, and you can easily see, like, how it was a lot more accepted to generalize and demonize, is probably the better word, another culture or another group of people that was against you, because they did that with the Japanese, and the Japanese did that with the Americans, equally so.
That's what's crazy. Like, we're Americans, we're always the good guys, but
not to them.
There hasn't been a single war we fought in where we weren't these evil, horrible, and in some cases we lived up to it.
Yeah.
But, for the most part, I wouldn't say that's who we are. But, yeah, that's kind of what you have to do to get there in your head, I suppose. And sometimes it can go a little too far.
Yeah.
I guess maybe we would say too successful.
Yeah.
As crazy as that sounds.
Like I said, at this time period, that was certainly a lot more acceptable to do that.
Yeah, you definitely do see
socially.
That.
This was the 50s.
Yeah. I guess the baseline was already kind of
that's
further.
That's a good way to say it.
Than it should have been.
Our baseline's a lot higher, lower, however you want to say it.
In a better
probably
place.
Higher. Yeah, in a better place now, about seeing people as people, everyone as a person, and not demonizing and villainizing. Though one could argue that does happen in other areas, but I'm not going to get into that. But definitely, it's less acceptable when it comes to other cultures and races and religions now than it used to be. So yeah, lots of things to take into account there. Probably PTSD, definitely historical, where society was in history at this time. And then, they're coming from something very similar that just happened. Okay, sorry. I got off on a rabbit hole, as usual. All right, retired.
I enjoyed your rabbit hole.
You enjoyed my rabbit hole?
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, sometimes I think maybe they're worth something. Sometimes I just ramble about my American Girl doll. So, who knows?
If
you know where you're going to go with me.
So that doesn't mean much.
All right. So, retired Colonel Robert M. Carroll was a 25-year-old first lieutenant at the time of the massacre. He reports that battalion riflemen opened fire on the refugees from their foxholes. Carroll, not convinced that this was the enemy, got the rifle companies to cease firing on the refugees. Good for you, Carroll. Colonel Carroll. Am I saying that correctly? Addressing him correctly?
I think it's pronounced colonel.
Colonel.
For those who don't know, colonel is not spelled anything like you would imagine.
It's not phonetically correct, no.
Kind of like Hermione.
It's true. Don't get me started on that. Don't get me started on that.
I meant to say Hermione.
Oh,
Hermione, the argument we've had does make sense.
It's also the name of a god.
But
Like, there's a whole thing there, goddess.
I meant to say Hermione.
Okay. This is also a well-fought debate in our house. We're all Harry Potter fans. Me, Daniel, our daughter, very big Harry Potter fans. And we have had huge debates about the pronunciation of names. And I will stick by my guns every time.
Well, the beauty of it is two of the people in this house are right and one is wrong.
Yes.
But the one who's wrong is a stubborn ass and refuses to allow the women of the house to be right. And my argument is, listeners, I understand phonetics. Megan understands it much more than I do. Much more than I do. But my reasoning is in a fantasy world, phonetics can be whatever the heck we want them to be. So characters like Hermione and Dobby.
Hermione was a Greek goddess, though. I believe Greek.
But in Harry Potter world, she doesn't exist.
But that's a name that already existed before Harry Potter. That's why the author...
What about Dobby?
Dobby, first of all, 2 B's, 2 consonants behind a vowel. Oh my gosh. Okay, anyway.
But it's a fantasy world and no rules apply.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right, I'm moving forward because I can't.
Yes, ma'am.
But yes, that is one of the rabbit holes. Believing it was safer to join a group of traumatized, confused, and wounded Koreans gathered there, he did not perceive a threat. There weren't any North Koreans in there, recalled Carroll, who said he then left the area